Sarah Chun had been working at Forward Operating Base Kilo for 8 months, and most soldiers barely noticed her. She kept to herself, walking between the supply depot and administrative offices with a quiet efficiency that made her nearly invisible. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the same khaki uniform as the other civilian contractors. Nothing about her suggested she was anything more than another desk worker processing paperwork and inventory reports. The base sat on a dusty plateau in Afghanistan's Kunar province, surrounded by rocky hills that provided both protection and blind spots. It housed about 200 personnel, mostly Army infantry with a mix of Marines, Air Force support crew, and civilian contractors like Sarah. The soldiers knew the contractors by sight, but rarely bothered learning their names. They had their own jobs to worry about. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez first really noticed Sarah during a supply run in March. He was picking up ammunition for his squad when he saw her checking serial numbers against a manifest. She moved with unusual precision, her eyes scanning each crate with the kind of attention that suggested she knew exactly what she was looking at. Most civilian workers just signed off on whatever the military guys told them was correct. "You been doing this long?" Rodriguez asked, trying to make conversation while his men loaded boxes onto their truck. Sarah glanced up briefly. "Long enough," she said, then went back to her checklist. Her voice carried no accent he could place, which was odd since most contractors were either local nationals or obviously American. Rodriguez noticed she never seemed stressed, even when supply flights were delayed or when incoming mortars forced everyone into bunkers. While other civilians looked nervous during alerts, Sarah remained calm, sometimes even helping direct people to safety with a competence that seemed out of place for someone whose job was supposedly counting boxes. Captain James Harrison, the base commander, had his own observations about the quiet contractor. During weekly briefings, Sarah occasionally attended to report on supply levels. She listened more than she spoke, but when she did contribute, her questions were unusually informed. She asked about patrol routes, defensive positions, and threat assessments with a precision that made Harrison wonder about her background. "What did you do before this?" he asked her after one meeting. "Various government work," she replied, offering nothing more. Harrison tried to dig deeper through official channels, but found Sarah's personnel file frustratingly thin. Her clearance was high enough for her position, and her work performance was exemplary. But there were gaps in her employment history that suggested classified assignments. When he called the contractor company, they confirmed she was authorized for her role, but declined to provide additional details. The base's intelligence officer, Lieutenant Jennifer Walsh, became curious about Sarah after noticing her behavior during surveillance briefings. These meetings were usually restricted to military personnel, but Sarah had clearance to attend when supply security was discussed. Walsh observed that Sarah asked technical questions about enemy tactics and equipment that went far beyond what a logistics worker should know. "How do you know so much about Russian weapon systems?" Walsh asked during one briefing when Sarah had identified an unusual rifle configuration in surveillance photos. "I read the intelligence reports," Sarah answered simply. But Walsh noticed Sarah had spotted details that even trained analysts sometimes missed. Private First Class Tommy Kim worked the night shift at the communications center and often saw Sarah walking around the base during odd hours. She claimed to be conducting inventory checks, but Kim noticed she always seemed to know when incoming traffic was classified or when patrol reports contained significant developments. She never asked questions, but her presence during sensitive communications felt deliberate rather than coincidental. The base operated in a relatively quiet sector compared to other parts of Afghanistan, but tensions have been rising over the past month. Intelligence reports indicated increased insurgent activity in nearby valleys, and patrol contacts were becoming more frequent. The enemy seemed to be probing defenses and gathering information about base operations. Sarah's workload had increased accordingly, with more frequent supply drops and ammunition requisitions. She processed everything without complaint, but some soldiers noticed she paid particular attention to defensive supplies. She seemed to know exactly how much ammunition each position required and which weapon systems needed priority maintenance. During a particularly intense week, when 3 patrols made contact with insurgent forces, Sarah volunteered to help with casualty processing. She assisted in the medical bay with a competence that surprised the medics. She knew how to handle trauma cases and seemed familiar with combat injuries, skills that extended far beyond basic first aid training. "Where did you learn to do that?" asked Corporal Lisa Martinez, the senior medic, after watching Sarah properly apply a pressure dressing to a wounded soldier. "Various places," Sarah replied, her standard non-answer that everyone had learned to expect. The base's defensive preparations intensified as intelligence reports painted an increasingly concerning picture. Enemy forces were massing in the region, possibly preparing for a coordinated attack. All personnel received briefings on emergency procedures, but Sarah already seemed to know the protocols better than soldiers who had been there longer. During weapons inspections, Sarah somehow always appeared when armory checks were conducted. She never touched the weapons, maintaining her civilian status, but her eyes tracked every rifle, machine gun, and grenade launcher with an assessment that went beyond curiosity. She knew the effective ranges and ammunition types for systems she supposedly had no training on. The base's Afghan National Army liaison, Major Rashid Ahmadi, noticed Sarah during joint meetings. He observed that she understood enough Pashto to follow conversations, though she never revealed this ability openly. When he tested this by discussing sensitive matters in his native language near her, he saw subtle reactions that confirmed his suspicions. "That civilian woman understands more than she reveals," he quietly told Captain Harrison. "She has soldier's eyes." Harrison had reached the same conclusion, but couldn't prove it. Sarah's performance reviews were flawless, and she never violated any regulations. But her presence felt like something more than civilian support. She moved through the base with the awareness of someone who understood tactical situations, not just supply chains. The mystery deepened when Sarah began working longer hours as threat levels increased. She stayed late reviewing manifests and supply requests, but guards noticed she also spent time studying base layouts and defensive plans that were supposedly outside her clearance level. When questioned, she claimed she was ensuring supply lines could function under emergency conditions. Rodriguez found himself watching Sarah more closely during this period. His squad had been taking heavier contact during patrols, and the stress was showing on everyone. But Sarah remained consistently calm, processing their equipment requests with an efficiency that suggested she understood exactly what they were facing in the field. "You ever been in combat?" he asked her one evening while picking up replacement gear. Sarah looked at him directly for the first time in their brief relationship. "Why do you ask?" "Just wondering. You don't seem bothered by any of this like the other contractors." She considered his question carefully before answering. Some people handle stress differently. The response was typical Sarah, truthful but incomplete. Rodriguez walked away more convinced than ever that there was something she wasn't telling anyone. As September approached, intelligence reports indicated that enemy forces were finalizing plans for a significant operation. The base increased its readiness posture with additional security measures and modified patrol schedules. Sarah adapted to these changes seamlessly, almost as if she had anticipated them. During a staff meeting to discuss the elevated threat level, Sarah made an unusual contribution. Instead of simply reporting supply status, she offered observations about enemy patterns based on requisition data. She had noticed that certain types of equipment were being requested more frequently, suggesting specific tactical preparations. "How do you know what this equipment indicates?" Captain Harrison asked. "Pattern analysis," she replied. "Supply trends often reflect operational planning." Her assessment proved accurate when subsequent intelligence confirmed enemy preparations that matched exactly what Sarah had predicted from supply data. Harrison made a note to investigate her background more thoroughly, but operational demands kept pushing the inquiry to tomorrow's priority list. The base's defensive preparations reached their highest level in early September when multiple intelligence sources confirmed an imminent attack. All personnel received final briefings on emergency procedures, ammunition was distributed to fighting positions, and civilian contractors were briefed on evacuation protocols. Sarah received the same briefing as other noncombatants, but several soldiers noticed she seemed more interested in defensive positions than evacuation routes. She asked detailed questions about fields of fire and fallback procedures that suggested tactical knowledge beyond what civilians should possess. The night before the attack, Sarah worked late in the supply depot, ostensibly completing inventory reports. But Private Kim, working his communications shift, observed her moving equipment to locations that weren't on any official manifest. When he mentioned this to Rodriguez the next morning, they decided to investigate after the current crisis passed. September 15th dawned clear and quiet with normal patrol activities and routine base operations. Sarah arrived at her usual time, processed the morning supply reports, and attended the daily briefing where intelligence officers reported no immediate threats. Everything appeared normal as the base settled into another day of standard procedures. At 11:37 that morning, the first mortar rounds impacted inside the perimeter. The attack began with a coordinated barrage that targeted communications equipment, vehicle parks, and command facilities with precision that indicated detailed surveillance. Within minutes, small arms fire erupted from multiple directions as enemy forces emerged from concealed positions in the surrounding hills. Sarah was in the supply depot when the first explosions shook the building. While other civilians dove for cover or ran for bunkers, she moved with deliberate purpose toward a section of the warehouse that housed cleaning supplies and maintenance equipment. Her movements showed no panic, only focused determination. Captain Harrison was in the command center when reports started flooding in from observation posts around the perimeter. The enemy had achieved tactical surprise despite intelligence warnings, and their attack was more sophisticated than anticipated. Multiple breach attempts were occurring simultaneously, stretching defensive resources across the entire base. Rodriguez was leading his squad toward their assigned defensive position when he saw Sarah through the supply depot windows. Instead of seeking shelter, she appeared to be accessing storage areas that he was certain were locked to civilian personnel. Before he could investigate further, enemy fire forced him to concentrate on his own mission. The base's defenders responded rapidly to the attack, but the enemy had achieved initial superiority through careful planning and coordination. Mortar fire continued to impact key facilities while small arms fire pinned down response teams. The situation was developing exactly as intelligence had predicted, but faster than anyone had hoped to counter. Sarah emerged from the supply depot carrying what appeared to be cleaning equipment, but her route toward the eastern perimeter suggested purposes beyond janitorial duties. She moved between buildings using cover and concealment techniques that would have impressed any infantry soldier, staying invisible while the battle developed around her. The first enemy breach occurred on the northern perimeter where a vehicle-borne explosive device created a gap in the defensive wire. Enemy fighters poured through the opening while suppressive fire from surrounding hills kept defenders from responding effectively. The base's carefully planned defenses were being overwhelmed by superior numbers and coordination. As the situation deteriorated, Sarah reached a position near the eastern watchtower where she began unpacking equipment that definitely wasn't cleaning supplies. Anyone watching would have realized that the quiet civilian contractor had been preparing for exactly this moment, though nobody was in position to observe her transformation. The battle for forward operating base Kilo had begun, and Sarah Chan was about to reveal who she really was. The mortar barrage intensified as enemy forces pressed their advantage. Captain Harrison coordinated defensive responses from the command center while explosions walked across the base, systematically targeting critical infrastructure. The attackers demonstrated knowledge of base layout that could only have come from extensive surveillance or inside information. Sarah reached the eastern defensive position carrying a large maintenance bag that clinked with metallic sounds inconsistent with cleaning supplies. The position was temporarily unmanned as its defenders had moved to reinforce the breached northern perimeter. She climbed the wooden steps to the elevated fighting platform with movements that showed familiarity with tactical positions. From her elevated vantage point, Sarah could see enemy forces advancing through the northern breach, while others maneuvered through the rocky terrain to the west. Their attack was methodical and professional, using covering fire and coordinated movement that indicated extensive training. This wasn't a random insurgent assault, but a carefully planned military operation. She opened her maintenance bag and began assembling equipment that had never appeared on any supply manifest. First came the components of a rifle that she put together with practiced efficiency. The weapon was a customized M4 variant with specialized optics and modifications that suggested precision shooting rather than general combat. Her movements were automatic, muscle memory from countless repetitions. Next came ammunition that was definitely not standard issue. The cartridges were match grade, rounds designed for accuracy at extended ranges, each one hand-loaded for optimal performance. She loaded magazines with the methodical care of someone who understood that every shot would need to count. The quantity suggested she expected a prolonged engagement. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was pinned down behind the motor pool when he heard the distinctive crack of precision rifle fire coming from the eastern tower. The sound was different from the chaotic automatic weapons fire that dominated the battle, measured, deliberate, and deadly accurate. Someone was systematically engaging targets with single shots placed exactly where they needed to go. Through the smoke and confusion, Rodriguez could see enemy fighters dropping in positions where they had felt safe from base defensive fire. Whoever was shooting from the eastern position was reaching out to ranges that exceeded normal combat engagement distances. The shots were coming approximately every 8 to 10 seconds, suggesting careful target selection and range estimation. Lieutenant Walsh was coordinating mortar counter-battery fire when reports started coming in about precision shooting from an unexpected source. The eastern tower wasn't supposed to have a sniper position, and, according to duty rosters, no qualified marksmen were assigned to that area. Yet someone was systematically eliminating enemy leaders and heavy weapons crews with shots that defied explanation. Sarah's first targets were enemy mortar crews positioned on distant ridgelines. Through her rifle scope, she could identify personnel operating crew-served weapons based on their movements and equipment. The mortars were causing the most immediate damage to base defenses, so neutralizing them took priority over closer threats that other defenders could handle. Her first shot traveled 830 meters to impact the primary mortar operator's center mass, dropping him instantly. The remaining crew members looked around in confusion, unable to determine where the shot had originated. Her second shot eliminated the assistant gunner before he could take over the weapon, effectively removing the mortar from the battle. The enemy had positioned their mortar teams specifically to avoid direct fire from known base weapons positions. They hadn't accounted for a precision shooter operating from an improvised position with equipment that didn't officially exist. Sarah's angles of fire allowed her to engage targets that were invisible to other defenders. She shifted her attention to a machine gun position that was suppressing the northern defensive line. The enemy gunner was using a Russian PKM machine gun from a sandbag position that provided excellent protection from frontal assault. But his flanking position exposed him to Sarah's elevated shooting position on the eastern side of the base. The shot required compensation for wind, elevation, and the target's intermittent movement as he fired controlled bursts. Sarah waited for the pattern she had identified in his firing cycle, then sent a round that found its mark at 712 meters. The machine gun fell silent as its operator collapsed over the weapon. Captain Harrison received confused reports about precision fire coming from the eastern sector. According to all official records, that position was unoccupied and contained no crew-served weapons capable of long-range engagement. Yet someone was systematically degrading enemy capabilities with shooting that exceeded anything in his unit's capability. "Who's in the Eastern Tower?" he radioed to his section leaders. "Nobody's assigned there, sir," came the reply from Sergeant First Class Jackson. "Position's been empty since Martinez moved his squad to reinforce the north side. Harrison couldn't spare personnel to investigate the mystery shooter while the battle continued. Whoever was providing the precision fire was definitely helping the defense, so questions could wait until they survived the current crisis. But he made a mental note that someone with serious shooting skills was operating outside normal command structure. Sarah continued engaging priority targets with mathematical precision. She had identified the enemy's command element based on their communications equipment and tactical positioning. Taking out leadership would disrupt coordination and potentially break up the organized assault before it could achieve its objectives. The enemy commander was positioned on a ridgeline 915 meters from her location, partially concealed behind rocks that provided protection from direct assault. Sarah calculated the ballistic solution for the extreme range shot, accounting for atmospheric conditions and target movement patterns she had observed through her scope. The bullet traveled for nearly 2 full seconds before impacting the target. The enemy commander dropped immediately, and Sarah could see confusion spreading through nearby units as they lost coordination. Radio chatter increased as subordinate leaders tried to re-establish command and control, but the damage was already done to their tactical cohesion. Private Kim was maintaining communications from the hardened bunker when he started receiving reports about the mysterious precision shooting. Multiple observation posts were reporting enemy casualties from long-range rifle fire, but nobody could identify the source. The shots were coming from positions that weren't supposed to contain friendly personnel. "Base command, this is OP3, crackled over the radio. "Someone just took out the mortar team on Hill 247. Single shot, clean kill. Don't know where it came from." Similar reports followed from other positions as enemy capabilities systematically disappeared under precision fire that seemed to come from nowhere. Kim plotted the reported enemy positions on his map and realized that all the targets were visible from the Eastern Tower, but that position was supposedly unoccupied. Sarah's ammunition management was critical for sustained engagement. She had prepared for exactly this scenario, with sufficient rounds to maintain effective fire throughout a prolonged battle. Each shot was planned and executed with the understanding that resupply was impossible and every round had to advance the defensive mission. She engaged a sniper team that had been targeting base defenders from a concealed position 800 meters to the northwest. The enemy sniper was skilled enough to remain invisible to conventional observation, but Sarah had identified his location through muzzle flash and the pattern of his engagements. Her counter-sniper shot eliminated the threat before he could cause additional friendly casualties. The enemy assault was beginning to falter as their support elements disappeared under precision fire. Mortar crews, machine gunners, snipers, and command personnel were being systematically eliminated by a shooter they couldn't locate or effectively counter. Their carefully planned attack was being disrupted by a factor they hadn't anticipated. Rodriguez finally got a clear view of the Eastern Tower during a lull in the close-range fighting. Through his binoculars, he could see a solitary figure operating from the elevated position with professional competence that looked nothing like the civilian contractors he knew. The shooter's movements were economical and practiced, suggesting extensive combat experience. "Base command, this is Rodriguez," he radioed. "I've got eyes on the Eastern Tower. There's definitely someone up there with a rifle, and they know what they're doing." "Copy that, Rodriguez. Can you identify the shooter?" Rodriguez adjusted his binoculars for a clearer view and felt his assumptions about base personnel completely rearrange themselves. "Sir, I think it's Sarah, the civilian contractor from Supply." The radio went silent for several seconds before Harrison's voice returned with obvious disbelief. "Say again, Rodriguez. Did you say the supply clerk?" "Roger, sir. Same person who's been processing our ammunition requisitions for 8 months." Except now she's shooting like a trained sniper and taking out targets at ranges that exceed our unit capabilities. Sarah was aware that her position would eventually be observed by friendly forces, but operational security took precedence over maintaining her cover identity. The base was under coordinated assault by a competent enemy force, and defensive success required all available capabilities regardless of official authorization or explanation. She identified an enemy anti-tank team maneuvering into position to engage the base's armored vehicles. Their RPG-29 system could penetrate the armor of any vehicle on base, and their position would allow them to interdict supply routes and reinforcement paths. Neutralizing this threat was critical for maintaining defensive mobility. The shot required precise placement to hit the RPG gunner while avoiding the explosive warhead that could detonate if struck directly. Sarah aimed for the operator's upper torso and sent a round that dropped him immediately. The assistant gunner attempted to take over the weapon, but a follow-up shot eliminated him before he could achieve firing position. Lieutenant Walsh reached a position where she could observe the eastern tower through her scope. What she saw challenged everything she thought she knew about the civilian contractors working on base. The shooter was definitely Sarah, but her equipment and techniques belonged to special operations rather than supply administration. Command, this is Walsh. I can confirm Rodriguez's identification. It's Sarah Chun from Civilian Contracts, and she's operating like a trained military sniper. Professional equipment, professional techniques, and shooting capabilities that exceed most of our qualified marksmen. Walsh observed Sarah's methodical approach to target selection and engagement. She wasn't firing randomly or responding to immediate threats. Instead, she was conducting a systematic campaign to degrade enemy capabilities in order of priority. This was operational planning at a level that suggested extensive tactical training. The enemy commander's replacement was trying to reorganize the assault when Sarah eliminated him with another long-range shot. Command confusion spread through enemy ranks as they lost their second leader in less than 20 minutes. Their coordinated attack was fragmenting into isolated actions as unit cohesion collapsed under the unexpected precision fire. Sarah's shooting was having psychological effects beyond the physical casualties she was causing. Enemy forces were becoming reluctant to expose themselves in positions they had considered safe. Crew-served weapon operations were being abandoned as operators realized they were being systematically targeted by a shooter they couldn't locate or counter. The base's defensive effectiveness was multiplying as Sarah continued eliminating priority targets. Her precision shooting was allowing other defenders to maneuver more freely and engage enemy forces from improved positions. What had begun as a desperate defensive action was transforming into a coordinated counterattack. Captain Harrison was beginning to understand that one of his supposed civilian contractors had capabilities that exceeded his most qualified soldiers. Sarah's precision shooting was single-handedly changing the course of the battle, but her true identity and authorization remained complete mysteries that would require investigation. The enemy assault reached its culmination point as leadership casualties and weapon systems losses degraded their combat effectiveness below sustainable levels. What had been a coordinated military operation was becoming a series of isolated firefights that base defenders could win through superior position and coordination. Sarah maintained her methodical approach to target engagement as the battle evolved around her. She had sufficient ammunition for continued operations and clear fields of fire to all remaining enemy positions. The transformation from quiet supply clerk to precision shooter was complete, but the full explanation remained a mystery that would reshape everyone's understanding of who Sarah Chun really was. The enemy assault collapsed completely after Sarah eliminated their third attempt at establishing command authority. Without effective leadership coordination, their remaining forces began withdrawing toward predetermined extraction points in the surrounding hills. What had been a serious threat to base security was becoming a tactical defeat for forces that had expected easy victory. Sarah maintained her overwatch position as scattered enemy elements attempted to break contact and withdraw. Her role shifted from defensive shooting to preventing escape of high-value targets who might provide intelligence about future operations. Each shot was carefully considered to maximize strategic value rather than simply stopping immediate threats. She identified a communications specialist carrying equipment that could provide valuable intelligence if captured rather than killed. Instead of engaging with lethal force, Sarah placed a precision shot that destroyed his radio equipment while leaving him wounded but alive. Her tactical judgment extended beyond simple target elimination to broader operational considerations. Captain Harrison coordinated the base's transition from defense to pursuit operations while trying to understand how a civilian contractor had single-handedly altered the course of battle. Reports from multiple observers confirmed that Sarah's precision shooting had eliminated over 20 enemy personnel, including all their leadership and most crew-served weapons operators. All stations, this is Base Command, Harrison broadcast. Enemy assault has been repelled. Shift to pursuit operations and casualty collection. I want all section leaders to report personnel status and ammunition expenditure. The response surprised him. Despite facing a coordinated assault by superior numbers, friendly casualties were remarkably light. Enemy precision shooting had been minimal, crew-served weapons had been neutralized quickly, and leadership disruption had prevented effective tactical coordination. The mysterious sniper fire from the Eastern Tower had been decisive. Rodriguez led his squad in clearing operations around the northern perimeter where the initial breach had occurred. They found enemy casualties scattered across defensive positions that should have been impossible to engage from known friendly locations. The precise placement of bullet wounds indicated shooting skills that exceeded anything he had seen in conventional military units. Whoever was shooting from that tower wasn't just good, Rodriguez told his men. They were operating at special operations level. Single shots, extreme range, perfect target selection. And somehow our supply clerk has been hiding those capabilities for 8 months. His squad members were equally baffled by the revelation. They had interacted with Sarah regularly during equipment draws and never suspected she possessed combat skills. Her transformation from invisible contractor to decisive tactical factor challenged their understanding of who was really working alongside them. Lieutenant Walsh approached the Eastern Tower as base security was reestablished. She wanted direct confirmation of what she had observed through her scope and answers to questions that would reshape her assessment of base personnel. The implications of Sarah's hidden capabilities extended far beyond simple contractor background checks. She climbed the wooden steps to find Sarah methodically cleaning her rifle with the same attention to detail she had always shown with supply inventories. The weapon was clearly custom-built for precision shooting, with modifications that suggested extensive experience and unlimited budget for optimization. That's some impressive shooting, Walsh said carefully. Want to explain where you learned skills like that? Sarah continued her methodical cleaning routine. Various training opportunities throughout my career. What career would that be exactly? Because your contractor file suggests clerical work, not sniper training. Sarah looked up from her rifle for the first time since Walsh had arrived. Some career fields require flexible skill sets. The non-answer was typically evasive, but Walsh noticed details that provided clues about Sarah's true background. Her rifle cleaning technique followed military procedures exactly. Her equipment organization reflected special operation standards, and her operational planning had demonstrated tactical knowledge that couldn't be learned from books. Captain Harrison arrived at the tower as Walsh was conducting her informal investigation. He wanted direct answers about capabilities that had saved his base, but remained completely outside normal command authority. The operational success was undeniable, but the security implications were concerning. Ms. Chun, he began formally. I think it's time for complete honesty about your background and authorization to possess the capabilities you demonstrated today. Sarah completed her rifle cleaning before responding. I'm authorized to perform whatever duties are necessary for mission success, Captain. Today's circumstances required specific capabilities. Authorized by whom? Your contractor company doesn't have personnel with sniper training, and your clearance level doesn't explain the equipment you were using. Sarah disassembled her rifle and returned the components to their concealed storage location within her maintenance bag. Authorization comes from levels above your current operational scope. Captain, but I can provide verification through appropriate channels. Harrison realized he was dealing with someone whose true assignment extended far beyond the supply duties that had provided her cover. The precision of her shooting and sophistication of her equipment indicated backing from agencies that operated outside normal military command structure. Private Kim monitored communications as base personnel conducted after-action procedures and casualty collection. Enemy losses were severe enough to represent a significant tactical defeat that would discourage future operations against the base. The mysterious precision shooting had transformed what could have been a disaster into a clear defensive victory. Base Command, this is OP2, came a report from the Western Observation Post. We've got enemy personnel withdrawing through grid 245 to 678. They're moving fast and appear disorganized. Estimate 12 to 15 individuals, no heavy equipment. Similar reports came from other positions as enemy survivors attempted to extract from the area. Their withdrawal was hasty and poorly coordinated, indicating that leadership casualties had completely disrupted unit cohesion. The assault force had been effectively destroyed as a combat-capable organization. Sarah monitored these reports while maintaining her position in the Eastern Tower. Her operational role wasn't finished until enemy withdrawal was complete and base security was fully restored. She kept her rifle assembled and ready for immediate engagement if pursuit operations required additional precision.